Tonight, we're in Scotland's energy capital, Aberdeen. It's a city undergoing big changes and reinvention as the world moves towards a greener future. But what does that mean for the people who live here? This evening, we're joined by local people who work in energy and other sectors, and who've come here to the Music Hall on Union Street with a range of political views. What do they want to talk about? Let's find out. Welcome to Debate Night. Debate Night is the show where you get to ask the questions, answering them on our panel this evening. Michael Shanks is the Scottish Labour MP for Rutherglen and the UK Government Minister for Energy and Net Zero. Previously a modern studies teacher, Michael was elected to Westminster just over a year ago. From the SNP, Kirsty Blackman MP is the party's chief whip at Westminster, spokesperson for work and pensions, women and equalities. Kirsty became an Aberdeen councillor at the age of 21 and was elected to Parliament 10 years ago. Lorna Slater is co-leader of the Scottish Greens and an MSP for Lothian. She was the Minister for Green Skills, Circular Economy and Biodiversity until the collapse of the Butte House Agreement last year. Edward Mountain is the Scottish Conservative MSP for Highlands and Islands. Edward is the convener of the Net Zero Energy and Transport Committee at Holyrood. He believes nuclear power has a key role to play in Scotland's energy future. And finally, the former Chief of Staff for Alex Salmond, Geoff Aberdein. After leaving Holyrood, Geoff set up the communications consultancy True North. He's also the co-host of Holyrood Sources, said to be Scotland's top political podcast. Please welcome them all to Debate Night. And welcome to our audience here in Aberdeen. It's great to be back with you in Scotland's energy capital. And you can join in the discussion from home. BBC DN is the hashtag you need right now to take part in the conversation on social media. And our Debate Night podcast, also Scotland's best political podcast, will be available for you to download straight after the show. So let's get started. Our first question of the night comes from Cameron Sword. Cameron, good evening.
Good evening. My question is that oil companies have dramatically reduced investment and jobs are now currently being lost. I see the devastating impact firsthand through my work. I just want to ask, why are we destroying an industry that employs over 200,000 people only to import fossil fuels at higher total emissions?
Thank you, Cameron. UK government is looking again at the approval process for Rosebank and Jackdaw as well, following new environmental assessments. Lorna Slater.
So I'm an electromechanical engineer, and until I was elected, I worked in renewable energy here in Scotland. All of us can see around us, from the wildfires in Los Angeles to the terrible floods in Spain to the floods we've had in Scotland, farms being damaged, businesses and homes being damaged. The climate crisis is real, it's here, it's now. You'll know yourselves that oil and gas has been in decline for at least a decade. You will have seen the challenges that's had, workers having to leave that industry, the industry constricting as the basins in Scotland decline, and it becomes more and more expensive to pull that oil out.
But we're going to need it until 2050. The UK Climate Change Committee tell us that.
So there's a difference between finishing up extracting from the existing basins and opening up new ones. So that is indeed what needs to happen, is that those basins, as they decline and finish up, then we phase out and we pivot. And you know yourselves how urgent it is that we pivot to that new investment in renewable energy, of which Scotland has an enormous amount. The Scottish Government's draft energy strategy lays out exactly how much energy we need and how many jobs we need to create for that. The challenge at the moment is getting enough engineers and technical people into renewable energy, because the jobs and opportunities are absolutely there.
But Cameron says jobs are being lost right now because of
this. They have been for more than a decade. Oil and gas in Scotland has been in decline. So this isn't a new thing. This isn't something that's going to happen. It's something that has been happening. And the longer we pretend that oil and gas can continue forever, the more difficult it is to grasp the nettle and say, guys, this is in decline.
What's your message to Cameron? He asked you the question. Look at him in the eye and tell him, what's your message to him tonight?
The message is oil and gas must decline. We are in a climate emergency. That means the existing basins must be phased out and new investment made in other decarbonised sources of energy.
Okay, what do you think about that?
Well, firstly, I'd like to thank Lorna for her considered response. However, what I'd like to communicate to you is that we're not talking about 20 years, 10 years, 30 years down the line. Jobs are being lost now as a result of the decisions that are being made, I'm sorry to say, Michael, by the UK government. I work in a company in the energy sector in Aberdeen. We have many suppliers working for us. We buy many things from across the industry, from many companies in Aberdeen and beyond, throughout the supply chain, logistics contractors, a lot. What we're seeing now, due to a decline in activity, we're losing contracts, and we're now looking like it might be possible that we'll have to reduce our workforce as well. This is not unique to my company. These effects have not been going on for 10 years. They've been going on for the past 1 year. Last year, we had a full order book, and the year before, flat out busy. Ever since the new budget has come in, all we've been doing, Michael, I'm not lying to you, all we've been doing is losing work.
So you're not transitioning? You're not part of this transition we keep hearing about?
We are transitioning as much as we can. And we have interest in decommissioning. We work in decommissioning, production, enhancement, well intervention. And what we're seeing from the operators is a vast reduction in investment today, and resulting in job losses today.
Right.
And I want to communicate that to you.
Michael Shanks, you have a go.
Well, I think I'd say two things in response to you, Cameron. First of all, oil and gas will play an incredibly important part in our energy and our economy for many, many years to come. And we're not seeking to speed up the decline in the North Sea. What we are seeking to do is give clarity to what comes next, because the truth is the North Sea is a declining basin. It's been declining for a decade or more, and it would be irresponsible for us not to think about what comes next. Now, the important thing for me is that we have, yes, a decline in oil and gas, which there has been already. More than a third of jobs have been lost in the past 10 years. This didn't arrive with a Labour government last year. More than 70,000 jobs have already gone from the industry. So that decline has to be matched with an incline in what comes next. And the truth is, either we sort of pretend that this can carry on as it has been, without taking any decisive action, or we have to work out what comes next.
Your colleague Brian Leishman says that Grangemouth is the very definition of an unjust transition at the moment. Isn't that the first test of that? And isn't that a warning to people here of what's coming their way?
I think it's a really important example of what happens when you don't start to plan for the future. And look, I came into this job 7 months ago. The very first thing in my entry as Minister for Energy was Grangemouth. That wasn't an issue that arose in July last year. We've known about Grangemouth for more than 2 years, more than 10 years actually. It's been precarious, but certainly Petroenios announced that they were likely to close it 2 years ago.
But you've known about the decline in North Sea oil as well for years. What's happening there?
Well, we haven't been in government, Stephen, is the point, and what we're trying to do is give clarity to the future. Well, we do. And that's what we're doing about giving clarity to the future of the industry, saying, first of all, we'll not issue new licences to explore new fields. That doesn't mean an end to oil and gas in the North Sea, because the consenting issue around projects in already licensed field is quite separate. But it does mean we have to grapple with what the future looks like and not pretend that this transition isn't already underway, because too many people have already lost their jobs. We want to make sure we're building what comes next.
I want to hear from just some other people in the audience. Man in the blue shirt here, yes.
Yeah, you're saying that the oil and gas is declining. Obviously, today I heard in the news as well that BP is going to be selling off its wind interests in the UK and selling it to a Japanese company. So I'm just wondering what the politicians think of hearing that news, that BP will be basically looking at its core industry, which is oil and gas.
Thank you, thank you. Lady in the middle here, yes.
I would like to know exactly what GB Energy is all about and how that's going to impact on Aberdeen and the rest of the country.
Very good question.
Come on, Michael.
It's a really good question. So we announced that GB Energy will be headquartered in Aberdeen, which is based on the fact that Aberdeen does have more than 60 years of tremendous energy experience and expertise that we want to bring into what comes next. It's 8.3 billion of investment. And the crucial thing about GB Energy is it's about investing in the renewables projects, but also in the supply chains and all the jobs that come behind it. Because 80% of jobs in this city in oil and gas are not directly on platforms in the North Sea, they're in the supply chains. And we want to make absolutely sure that we're protecting those jobs.
And the jobs with GB Energy won't come for 20 years, we're being told.
No, well, I don't think that's right at all. What we've said is, of course, the headquarters of GB Energy will have 200 or 300 people. We're already recruiting. The bill has to finish its passage through Parliament before we can actually set that up. But the whole point about GB Energy is investing in the supply chains. Those aren't going to be sitting in an office in GB Energy, but they will be in companies right across the city and across the UK, delivering the manufacturing for the renewable future that we should have had in this country for the past decade, but we haven't.
Geoff Aberdein, the SNP's position, the presumption against new exploration, do you understand what their position is at the moment on oil and gas?
No, I don't. And frankly, and I've said this publicly before, the SNP's position on a presumption against oil and gas is tokenistic and is virtue signalling for any other reasons, but main one being that they don't have responsibility for oil and gas licensing, so it's a silly position for them to put themselves in for a number of reasons. But please, if you permit me, I think it's really important that we don't characterise this debate as choosing the economy over the climate. I'm fed up of that narrative being pursued. In this city, within 100 miles of where we're sitting tonight, there are 22 offshore wind projects, ScotWind, Intog. They could be transformational for the green energy industry and for this city and region. Of those 22 projects, only one has consent just now. Now, the good news for us all in Aberdeen is that that project has chosen to put its headquarters right here in this city. So that's the shape of things to come. That's encouraging, and we should welcome that. But sadly, all of those projects, including the one that's got consent, there is not a gram of steel in the North Sea just now. This is going to take time. This is going to take generations to build. They need to get through consenting, CFD process. They need to get supply chain orders in there. There's lots of things that have to happen. This will take up to 30 years to get this stuff moving. So what do we do in the meantime? Well, Lorna, your point on the climate emergency is well made. But we are relying, ONS tells us in 2023, on 80 billion pounds of imports in fuels. Oil, gas, some coal, and electricity. Imports are not particularly good for our country for two reasons. One, we don't get the economic activity. We don't get the jobs. We don't have the balance of payments benefits. We don't have economic growth, which was something that we really desperately need in this country. But secondly, and most importantly, to your point, and I have to address this, is that we're using LNG, gas largely from Norway. When we can't use Norway, who are usually supplying the European continent post-Ukraine-Russia conflict, we're using the US and Qatar. Now, that's LNG, liquid natural gas. That is 4 times more carbon intensive than our domestic supply. We have all the tools at our disposal right here in this region. 1,000 energy supply chain companies ready to go for the green industrialisation of our country. If they don't have any profits from oil and gas, they won't be sustained until this wonderful opportunity in renewables is made available. Stop the virtue signaling and be more pragmatic about what could be the biggest economic opportunity in our country.
Fergus Ewing, your old nemesis on many things, says that you're Donald Trump's little helpers on this because we're going to end up buying it from either Norway or America.
So the difference about looking at what's in the North Sea, that isn't reserved for Scotland. There is no publicly owned energy company that's going to dig that up and keep it for us to use. It's dug up by commercial companies, whether that is BP or Japanese firms or other firms. That is dug up by commercial companies and sold on the open global market. It isn't reserved for Scotland. We currently have a mix of imports and exports of gas and oil because it just depends on what's happening with the global market and what is the condition of current contracts. So keeping the North Sea going, which is an increasingly expensive basin to extract, is going to be uncompetitive globally anyway, even if we keep that going.
What's the answer? We have more imports. How much is how many imports? 80, 100
the
million,
answer is
million?
twofold.
All that money could be being spent on renewables.
The answer
Surely
is
that's
twofold. The answer is twofold. One is to urgently reduce our energy needs by upgrading our homes and heats and buildings so that we don't need so much energy.
That's a long-term aspiration.
It can happen quite quickly. Sweden did theirs quite quickly. That could happen within a decade. Upgrading our homes in Scotland. The other piece of that is, of course, the transition to renewables very, very quickly. Yes, absolutely. The existing oil basin will go on for years. There is a draft plan for this, the Scotland's energy strategy. We're waiting very urgently for the Scottish government to bring the final one.
But why should Norway make money out of this and not us?
Because nobody makes money. Nobody makes money on a dead planet. All the countries in the world got together to agree the Paris Agreement to reduce fossil fuel emissions by 45%. Each nation in the world, I think I read this week, has effectively reduced by 3% because there's this idea that, we can keep doing it, but everyone else doing it is bad. No, we all have to meet our obligations under the Paris Agreement.
Just
briefly, Jeff.
Okay, Lorna, hang on a second. Jeff.
Very quickly, sorry. I think Lorna makes an important point about global leadership and showing global leadership on the world stage. Global leadership is not shirking our responsibility and saying we'll stop here and offshore the emissions to other countries that are producing. Global leadership is being an oil and gas producing country, sustaining the supply chain base, creating a new renewables industry and saying to the world, we managed to do it and we sustained employment. That is global leadership.
Okay. We have got many people in the audience who work in the energy sector, I know, this evening. Gentleman with the glasses here. Yes.
Thank you. I'd just like to say that it can be quite confusing at times that you see the government one day are running and signing up to climate agreements, then the next day they're running to open up new licences for new exploration, and then they're going back and they're ripping up the climate agreement, and then they're going back and it's going to court over the new. You know, it's very confusing.
Mixed messaging.
Is the government, what is their plan? It seems that they're just out of control, trying to keep everyone happy and not actually having a clear vision.
Thank you.
Correct.
Man with the beard, just behind you. Yes, on you go.
You mentioned there about upgrading homes, and I'm just wondering who pays for that. A pensioner in an old house that's already lost.
Okay, I'll come back to you, Lorna.
Okay.
I just want to get some more views in the audience. Man at the back.
I believe that the energy capacity for renewables in Scotland is 106% of what we need. So if we are pulling energy in, where are you putting the other energy?
Geoff,
are we building farms for...
I mean, that's electricity, I think we're talking about here, isn't it?
I think it's just really important to understand that that's electricity equivalent. So that's really important when the wind blows because it's intermittent, but when the wind doesn't blow and we have very cold days, sorry, very quickly, but then we rely on gas for our base load. But the other point is that doesn't include heat and transport. So 85% of British homes are still gas-powered. 1.5 million Scottish cars are still petrol, 1.3 are diesel. So there is still a requirement there for a bigger energy mix.
All right. Geoff says he doesn't understand the SNP's position on this presumption against oil and gas. Do you want to explain it for us clearly for everyone here tonight?
I mean, every new licence should be looked at robustly, should be looked at actually in terms of climate compatibility, should be looked at in terms of the benefits and the takeaways. But I mean,
what about in terms of jobs?
I think
in
terms of the key point around jobs, I absolutely think the UK government's got it wrong. I think the windfall tax is exactly what is causing the problems. I think you're completely right. That massive acceleration that there is, you're seeing a huge number of companies that are saying, well, it's not worth carrying on in the North Sea. And there's like a seesaw here, right? We know that in future, no matter what we do, no matter how much drilling we do, the oil and gas is going to run out, right? You know, some point in the future, well into the future, that's going to happen. We need to make sure that we're increasing those renewable jobs before we're taking down those oil and gas jobs. My biggest concern is that the oil and gas workforce is massively mobile, right? Folk are going offshore, folk are going, away to Dubai for 6 months at a time. They're spending an awful lot of time going around the world. They're a very, very mobile, highly skilled workforce. If oil and gas goes down too quickly before these other jobs go up, we'll lose that workforce.
But it's not helped by the mixed messaging that man was talking about.
No, it's not. It's not helped by the mixed messaging. I think, in terms of the windfall stuff, right? Labour have got this wrong because they're doing it too quickly.
Yeah, but what about the SNP? What about the SNP in this
policy? The windfall tax was introduced by the Conservatives.
And you've backed it, right?
Yeah.
And continue doing it. But why? You know what? The problem is Westminster, right? The problem wasn't the Tories. The problem isn't Labour. The problem is Westminster in general.
Nicola Sturgeon says there's a presumption against any new oil and gas exploration. Do you still go along with that?
The position is that everything should go through a robust assessment of whether or not actually. And we've had a new court case, so there does require to be other assessments. But what we need to do is what I would expect Labour to do, and I'm frankly bamboozled that they're not, is focus on jobs. Focus on jobs, and they're not doing that. We're ending up in a situation where we're going to lose jobs in Aberdeen.
Michael Shanks, let's just be really clear. We are focusing on jobs. And the one particular investment in 8.3 billion in Great British Energy, the SNP failed to support. Although, interestingly, on many of these topics, licensing seems to be another one. Your colleagues in Holyrood take a very different view, where the SNP support it in Edinburgh, but you don't support it at Westminster.
You had a £28 billion green pledge that you turned your back on, and now it's £8 billion is going into GB Energy.
You don't support that in Aberdeen.
Only £8 billion is
jobs going in this city that you don't support.
SSE alone has got more than £50 billion of stuff in the pipeline. What good do you think £8 billion is going to do?
OK, lots of hands up here in the audience. Gentleman with the glasses, just at the back. Yes, on you go.
I think it's important to have a just transition, and that means not decimating the workforce here locally, striking the balance as we transition as quickly as possible to renewables. In terms of the policy of the Labour government is all over the place. They should have and need to start listening to the industry representatives. They know what's going on. The gentleman asked the question in the first place, said that this has not just happened, the loss of jobs and all the rest of it. Yes, it has happened gradually over the years, but there's been a marked decline over the last year in his order book. That's a direct result of the Labour Westminster government's policy, which is all over the place. It's misleading. If you take the likes of GB Energy, all of the jobs that was going to create here in Aberdeen. Yes, over 20 years, you might get a few. You look and see what's happening at Grangemouth. The only refinery in Scotland is going to close down. There's 5 in England. The UK government decided to invest 600 million in a loan guarantee for a Belgian refinery. That tells a message of the fact that the Labour government don't care 2 jots about Scotland.
Okay, thank you. And gentleman with a yellow hat in his hands. Yes.
Can I ask, what happens when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine?
Kirsty Blackman.
I can answer that one.
No, Kirsty.
I mean, you've got all sorts of different... The whole point of this is you've got to have an energy mix, right? You've got to have all sorts of different things. We're increasing the amount of battery storage that there is. There will be... Sorry?
Storage will last
there's
for about
lots of
2 hours.
mechanisms for renewable energy.
All sorts of different things, but the whole point is it's a mix, right? You've got the wind energy, you've got the tidal energy, you've got all sorts of different energies. You've got the hydrogen as well. We're doing lots of cool things with hydrogen in Aberdeen. The whole mix comes together and ensures that you've got that heat and power that we need.
And that mix,
as Lorna says,
should also include nuclear. And of course, the SNP are ideologically opposed to nuclear.
Absolutely
the next generation of nuclear reactors, the small modular reactors, are going to be critical to the kind of...
Would you put one in your constituency?
Wait, no.
In your constituency, would
hang
you
on a
put one
second,
there?
Lorna. That's something you're in favour of, Edward Mountain.
Absolutely, but listen, I've been sitting on the sidelines listening to this, and we're all concerned about the 100,000 jobs up in Scotland that are going to be lost because of the policy, the pretending policy that we don't need oil. We are going to need oil, and I'd rather get it developed in Scotland, where we know, as Geoff said, it is far cleaner to produce it in Scotland, and it means that we benefit from it in Scotland, and we're not offshoring that
Well, Lorna's point is it's more expensive.
Well, hold on. Let me just finish to say, there was a lady there who asked what Great British Energy was. Well, I think that's one of the best questions of the night. We've been looking at this in the committee since August last year, and we finally signed off on the legislative consent motion to allow it to take place in Scotland a week ago. Do I know what it's going to do as convener of the committee? I have no idea. So it's a great question. Michael Shanks will tell you.
Could have asked me. I was at your committee, Edward.
You never answered any of the questions in the committee.
I'm very happy to explain it in great detail.
Well, why don't you explain it?
Well, very clearly what we've said is it's £8.3 billion to invest in renewable projects in the clean energy of the future, critically investing in supply chains in this country, because for far too long we've offshored the manufacturing and industrial future. We want those jobs in this country here, and we want to help support the companies to set up in Aberdeen and across the UK. That's not going to happen. GB Energy is around fixing the gaps in the system at the moment that prevent some of that investment coming forward. And the second really important thing is we also want communities to have a stake in energy as well, to own some of these energy projects. Great British Energy will help communities own their own energy, and that's a really important step
1,000 jobs you were going to bring, not going to happen.
Not correct,
400 jobs might happen in 5 years' time. Whether they all happen in Aberdeen or not,
at your committee, and I answered you. 200 to 300 jobs is what we've always said in the head office, but tens of thousands of jobs through the investment of GB Energy right across the country, and that's the commitment we've still got.
Geoff Aberdein?
Very quickly, maybe help Mike a little. Well, I do welcome the fact that the Labour Party did put GB Energy in Aberdeen, because I believe it wasn't a given. So the fact that it is here is important. Now you need to make sure it's a purposeful vehicle and actually does what it says in the tin. Very quickly, the gentleman mentioned Grangemouth, and I just want to say one thing about that. And again, it's a devastating indication of what might befall other communities not too far from here if we don't watch ourselves. One thing I would say to you, Michael, is this. If we back the Acorn carbon capture project at St Fergus post-haste, that won't just generate lots of employment, thousands of jobs in the northeast of Scotland. The repurposing of the pipeline from Peterhead to Grangemouth would secure Grangemouth's future as a chemical plant. Now, from that, it won't be the same jobs as a refinery, I'm afraid, but from that, you could build other initiatives for sustainable aviation fuel. So please back Acorn as a priority.
That's storing carbon emissions underground, under the North Sea.
Yeah.
You're looking at that?
the potential from carbon capture is extraordinary. I was in Aberdeen just before Christmas hearing about just the level of the caverns under the North Sea that we could store, enough to go right back to the Industrial Revolution levels of carbon. It's an extraordinary opportunity.
So are you going to fund it? Are you going to fund carbon capture?
What we inherited was, on the Track 1 projects in Teesside, a decision that had been failed to be made by the last government. We pushed it forward and invested £20 billion. I'm just coming to it. The Track 2 projects are the next phase, which we're really supportive of, but it is multiple billions of pounds of investment, and rightly, the government using public money has to be very careful and scrutinise every penny of it, but we are supportive of the Acorn projects.
You're at risk of losing this project if you don't move forward more quickly. We need Track 2.
I just gently say, I know this is really difficult to hear, but we've been in government for 7 months, and we have grappled with these decisions as quickly as we can.
I want to go back to Cameron.
You've got more for new
Hang on a
nuclear.
second. Cameron asked the question here. Have you heard anything that makes you more optimistic about your future?
Not my immediate future. I mean, I guess the transition to renewables is inevitable as we allow the basins in the North Sea to decline, because there are still many near-field opportunities for exploration. Correct. There's also massive oil discoveries west of Shetland in Cambo, Rosebank, Jackdaw. There's tons of opportunity out there still to be had. So, near term, I don't see any opportunities. In fact, frankly, I think we're on the cliff edge at the moment, and I think, Michael and the panel, you will shortly gain an understanding of just how bad things are going to get with the current fiscal policy of the government. I'll go back to your previous point that it was a policy of the Conservative government, the 75% windfall tax, and you're absolutely correct. However, you've not sought to mitigate that. You've just piled on more pressure, which, and let me finish, please. Let me finish. So, you've piled on more pressure to operators. Oil and gas isn't just drilling. There are various other aspects that and activities that we do. Well intervention, abandonment, all of these activities are being pushed further down the line. Operators aren't making the investment decisions, and it's all because the rewards aren't there to be had because of the punitive
Very briefly, Michael. Just really quickly, Cameron, because I think it is a really important point. We listen to a lot of feedback. I've been in Aberdeen almost every single month in this job listening to the companies. The budget in October recognised that with keeping the capital allowances. What we're now wanting to do really quickly is move forward with the future of the fiscal regime, so there's certainty. The EPL, the so-called windfall tax, was always supposed to be temporary. The previous government extended it and extended it and extended it. We want to bring it to an end and give certainty to what comes next, so that there is some certainty in industry about what the taxation regime looks like.
OK, what we're talking about here tonight affects us all in different ways as well, this transition. That takes us to our second question of the night. Your views from home. The hashtag is BBCDN on social media. Where's Tom Lawson this evening? Tom, good evening.
Yes, good evening. Why are the SNP and the Green Party advocating and promoting industrialisation of the Scottish countryside by allowing giant pylons to be erected?
Thank you, Tom. We saw those stop pylon signs at the roadside on the drive up here today. Keir Starmer has vowed to end what he calls NIMBYism, which he says is holding Britain back in all areas, including this. Edward Mountain.
Well, if I get 25 emails a day about pylons and battery storage sites, I reckon I've got an easy day ahead of me. I mean, they are a problem, and the problem has come about purely because this government has allowed the piecemeal development of wind farms across the Highlands. We've got wind farms here, wind farms there, and we've ended up paying huge amounts of money to companies for constraint payments when they haven't been able to generate because there isn't the pylons. So now we've got a rush by two energy companies, SSEN and SPN, to develop and put power lines across the Highlands and across down through here, and it's not acceptable. Because what we've got to do...
So what's the alternative?
Well, I'll tell you what the alternative is we invest in things like hydrogen, and we work out that instead of storing it in batteries, which will fill up incredibly quickly, mined from resources in places like Congo using child labour, we change the electricity into hydrogen, and we use the gas pipelines that we were told we're no longer going to be able to be used and can be converted, and we can pump that underground. Or we could pump it round the coast. We can't do it.
I mean, that's not Conservative policy. That's certainly not what the last Conservative government were doing, because they refused to make any decisions on putting hydrogen
I'm not going to answer for what goes on at Westminster. I'm telling you what our policy is and what our belief is up here.
Two different parties.
No. I respond I respond to the needs of my constituents and their concerns, and we do not want to see pylons scattered across with a little promise of a community bribe which is going to be used to paint another church hall or do something. It's got to be more meaningful engagement, and we've got to see local communities who are suffering some of these monstrosities right on the edge of their villages benefiting from them. But that's just not a payoff. And I'm sorry, whatever's going on and whatever the plan is for the future, it's got to be more joined up.
Lady in the front row down here.
I stay out at Contour at Lea Lodge. I have 10 energy projects going in the space of half a mile wide by half a mile long. One of them is the largest hydrogen plant in Europe going in my back door. I am not against renewables, but renewables should not be put in community places where there is homes and people's lives are being ruined, their mental health has been affected, and these companies continually tell us just what we want to hear.
Well, hang on, you just said hydrogen's the answer. That lady's
I
not
agree
happy.
with hydrogen needs to be brought in,
but
I don't believe it should be put in a greenfield site beside homes.
Okay, thank you. Stephen, you can build hydrogen plants where you want to. It needs sensible planning. And actually, the sensible thing to do is when we're developing ScotWind, is we work out where we bring the electricity to a hydrogen part before we put it into the national grid and the price gets high. So we work out properly. We have a proper plan, which we haven't had in this country ever since wind first came here. It was just piecemeal development done on who had the biggest wallet and could get the turbines where they wanted them. Nothing to do with connecting it to the national grid.
Lorna, Slater.
Yeah, absolutely. I understand the frustration around the pylons. I think we all are aware that with the transition to renewables, we will need new infrastructure in order to make the best of that opportunity to create those jobs and to decarbonize our economy and even build it so that we can export that electricity. I think the frustration is around how they've been planned for, and Edward is actually right that it's not been strategic. Each sort of set of pylons is planned for individually, so it's hard for any of us to understand the overall strategy of what's being intended, where, for example, nature corridors are being affected and where communities are being affected. So there is definitely more that can be done to make sure that's strategic and actually to make sure communities and all of us are seeing the real benefits of that, and that would be in cheaper energy bills. Because I think that's a frustration for everybody who has to look at pylons or live next to that infrastructure and say, why am I still paying high bills? And the best thing that the UK government could do is unlink the artificial connection between gas prices and electricity prices, because we can generate electricity very cheaply in Scotland. We have a lot of weather. We can do that. But that artificial link is driving your bills up and costing everyone in Scotland money.
Let's just go back to this lady down here. Yeah.
In Lea Lodge, which is just a little rural hamlet, we, as I say, have got 10 different projects going on. The biggest majority of that is battery storage, overhead cables going across battery storage and a hydrogen plant, which just baffles me how that can possibly be allowed to go all in one small area. You know, and the public, we've all went against it, and yet we still get, on a daily basis, from government that we don't actually have a voice. We don't have the voice. We asked in Parliament, Douglas Lumsden just a couple of weeks ago asked in Parliament to veto this just now to give things a chance to catch up. And Labour and SNP stood against us on this, but none are willing to meet the public and ask our advice on this. We are just being railroaded through.
Okay, Michael Shanks, you've said you would quite happily live underneath pylons. You believe that this is part of the price that we have to pay for the just transition, is a changing landscape around all of this. And there's been suggestions that people should be paid for this, to sweeten it up, pounds for pylons. Is that where we're going with this? Would you support that?
Well, I think we do need to build the infrastructure that brings the clean power to where it's needed. The other thing with the grid is that in many cases it's 50, 60 years old. The grid has been in need of an upgrade for a very long time. It's more than 700 gigawatts of projects to try and join the grid in this country, and some of those are demand projects that will deliver the economic growth we need and the jobs that we need, but they can't connect because the grid is so out of date. And I'm afraid what that requires is an upgrade in infrastructure, and some communities will have to host that infrastructure. And we've been really honest as a government that the days of sort of pretending that we can just muddle on with the infrastructure we've got at the moment just aren't going to work
so we
anymore.
Can't say
We've got
no,
to
we
take
don't
some...
want this.
No, of course. So at every stage of the process, communities should absolutely have a say in that, and they absolutely will in the planning system have a say. But ultimately, as a country, we have to recognise that nationally important infrastructure has to be built somewhere.
Would you build a nuclear power station in your constituency?
Well, I already said that the new small modular reactors, I think, are absolutely safe and fine to be. And I would also just say on infrastructure, my constituency is a stone's throw from one of Europe's biggest onshore wind farms, and there are pylons going right across my constituency. So this isn't in my backyard or someone else's. We want communities to have a voice in this process. It's really important that we bring communities with us. But I have to say, the important infrastructure that hasn't been built for so long, that is holding this country back in terms of economic growth, does need to be built, and it has to be built somewhere. We want to do that in a partnership. Now, if I could just quickly pick up on the point about the number of projects in specific areas, I think this is a really important point. We should have been planning much more strategically these projects. We've now launched the Spatial Strategic Energy Plan and also a land use framework for the whole of the UK, which is about recognising there are certain areas that are absolutely perfect for energy projects. In fact, in other areas where an accumulation of projects has already been really difficult for communities.
We should have been doing that 10 years ago.
Should these people be paid
to make it more acceptable to their communities?
Well, I think the community benefits that come from hosting infrastructure should be really significant. And I think Edward touches on the point that the current framework, for example, onshore wind, tends to be a kind of community fund that distributes money to the local community. It's not always used in the most appropriate way. So for network infrastructure, the previous government, in fact, which I know you don't recognise, Edward, but it was a Conservative government, consulted on bill discounts for those who host energy infrastructure. We're looking at whether we should take that forward or not. The community acceptability is really important to this.
Okay, let me hear some other voices. Man in the second row, yeah.
It's a bit like locking the stable door after the horse is bolted. There doesn't seem to be any long-term thinking. We've been talking about these problems for 20 years, and it doesn't seem that anything's really tangibly happening.
Well, I think I would agree with you, I have to say. We should have been doing this a very long time. I mean, the idea of if you're going to build basically an entire new energy system that is very different from the days of a coal power station being right next to a city, and you don't have the infrastructure. We knew this, we were going to have to build the network infrastructure.
Geoff Aberdein, what's gone wrong here?
What's gone wrong is, frankly, successive governments have not upgraded a grid infrastructure, as Michael pointed out, for 60 years. We now have a plethora of new projects that we need to put onto said grid and improve our infrastructure, and then the result is you have your communities and like this lady here who's completely and legitimately frustrated at what she has before her house. The sad reality is if we're going to have a renewables revolution, as we want to eventually see, it will take a lot of new infrastructure in place. But what I want to see is a bit of creative thinking. So yes, I accept there's going to have to be pylons coming down through arteries of Scotland. I was in the government when we approved Bewley Denny. I know how controversial this can be. But can we be creative? You know, why can't we? We've done it with oil and gas. There's a pipeline underneath the country that goes all the way into Grangemouth. I mentioned it earlier. Can we do some of this, Michael and Kirsty, the SNP, underneath the ground? Can we reroute it around communities so they don't have to be there? I think, my point is this. I accept this has to happen, and I want it to happen, in all honesty. But if we can't bring the people that you're elected to serve with us, it's all for naught. And finally, I must say I agree with Lorna. What's the biggest injustice of all this? That we're having to take all the disruption because of the northeast and the north of Scotland are providing all this energy, and we're paying the biggest energy bills.
Absolutely.
Something's got to change.
Kirsty Blackman, is he right? Is there a more creative way to solve this problem?
I think there is a more creative way, and just in terms of the kind of regulatory landscape and where we are. I mean, the presumption for overhead pylons is a UK government decision because they've got control of that bit of it. So that's where that decision comes from. That's where that presumption comes from. And then in terms of the actual planning stuff, then your local council takes a decision, and that's called into Scottish Government and for some of the big stuff, for most of the big stuff. So there's like 3 different levels of government taking all different decisions on this. If we had the UK government make a decision to, that they'll say, we'll presume that stuff will be undergrounded, then that's what the energy companies would have to do. But the reality is that because it's not strategic, because no government is in control of this, because actually the energy companies can make the decisions about this stuff, and they've got some rules in terms of consultation, they've got some rules in terms of how they've got to do the pylons, for example, but it's led by the companies. And actually, I think I agree with all of the comments that it's not been strategic enough. We've needed both governments to work together to take decisions, particularly about how this should look, what the best thing is for communities. And well, because we were working with a Conservative government that were completely intransigent and
we're letting the market
unwilling
just go
to have
run wild.
any conversations with us about sensible stuff like this.
All right, I hear from the audience. A man in the third row. Yes, on you go.
Yeah, I don't have any sympathies for the other audience member, but the suffering caused by the eyesore of pylons or disruption of construction is orders of magnitude lower than the suffering caused by a high energy costs for the country as a whole. So I think this is one of those, there's a greater good to be had here. And we talked earlier about younger generations not pulling their weight. This is a sort of sacrifice this generation has to make, like in the Victorian era when we made the sacrifice of huge public costs for the sewage system. We have to have that sort of sacrifice in this generation.
Okay, let's go back to Tom, who asked the question on that. What do you think about that, Tom?
I think the visual impact is just one small part of it, and I agree with Geoff. Why can't it at least be put underground or undersea? Apparently, it's coming undersea from the actual wind farm offshore anyway. The other concern I have is the biosecurity. Thousands of tons of concrete being injected into prime farmland and land the length and breadth of the country. Vehicles, construction vehicles, in and out. Farmers have got enough problems as it is with biosecurity without having construction sites dotted up and down the country.
Okay, thank you for that. Your views on all of that from home, the hashtag is BBCDN on social media. We're in Aberdeen this evening. Next week, we're going to be in Edinburgh for our 150th edition of the show. So if you'd like to come along and be part of the audience for that special programme, or the one the week after in Greenock, it will be special as well. Just go to the website and you can use the QR code that's on your screen as well to scan, and that takes you straight to the application forms. Let's go to our next question of the night, which comes from Steve Milner. Steve, evening.
Evening. Slightly different topic now. Given the high and increasing number of economically inactive people, is it not time to reduce rather than increase government handouts?
Thank you. Keir Starmer said that Labour had inherited a country that literally wasn't working. 25% of the working population in Glasgow are currently economically inactive. That's either students or those not able to work or those not seeking work at the moment. What do we do about that? Michael Shanks.
I think it's a really important question because, of course, the purpose of the welfare state is to be there as a support when you need it most. It's not designed to be there for every single person who just isn't going out to work. And I think what we need to find is a balance here where people who are genuinely unable to work should be supported and the government should provide the benefits to make sure that they can live a reasonable life on benefits. But that if people are able to go out to work, we should be doing everything we possibly can to support them
Liz
to do
Kendall
that.
says some of them are taking the mickey. Would you use that language?
I mean, I think it is important to recognise that, particularly after COVID, actually, our productivity rate has declined considerably. And so I think there is a real challenge for us to say that if public money is going out the door in eye-watering amounts on unemployment benefits, we should be doing everything we can to make sure people are in work if they can be. Now, I think some of this is around the skills that we provide to people. Some of it's also about recognising that the state of the NHS has a really important part to play in this because there are people that can't work at the moment because they're either waiting for treatment and not getting it, or particularly on mental health issues, they're waiting year after year for an appointment to get the support that they need and could actually be very productive in the workplace if they got that support. So it's a kind of collection of different policies that we need to get right. What Liz Kendall's doing and what the government's looking at the moment is what particularly targeted support the government could provide to people that are unemployed that is essentially on one hand saying, we'll help you with skills support, we'll help you with whatever you might need to find a job and to stay in it. But the other side of it is, if you don't meet us halfway on this, we're not going to continue to just pay benefits out every single year. And that's, I think, whether you call that tough love or not, I don't know, but it is a recognition that public money is scarce, that we work hard to pay taxes, that a lot of people legitimately it can't work and should be supported and should get that support. But for those that can, they should be encouraged to get out to work.
Kirsty Blackman has just sighed deeply there. You talk a lot about the need for migration to Scotland. We've got 800,000 Scots who are economically inactive out of a population of 5.5 million. And
I think migration's brilliant. Actually, if you look at...
the question wasn't about migration, it's about economically inactive people.
Sorry,
What do we do about them?
In terms of economically inactive people, in terms of what Liz Kendall is doing, what Liz Kendall is doing is penalising and demonising people that are out of work. In terms of the changes to disability benefits, for example, disabled people are terrified because there's some disabled people that literally cannot work and are terrified that they're going to have their bank accounts looked at, because that's what Labour's proposing.
Do you think, it's acceptable for 800,000 Scots to be economically inactive?
I mean,
that include retired
do you think it's acceptable for so many children to be in poverty and the UK government to refuse to remove the two-child cap? Do you think it's acceptable for them to look at and to prioritise tackling issues with the benefit system, clawing back money from people who, in some cases, have been given it by the government, by the DWP, right? Through no fault of their own, the DWP has overpaid them. The UK government's focusing on that. It's not focusing on tax dodgers. It's not focusing on those people, those companies that are refusing to pay tax. There's a whole lot more money you could get back from them.
I think the challenge here is that Kirsty's deliberately not answering your question, Stephen, because the truth is that 800,000 people that and it doesn't include retired people. It's people who could be economically active but are not. Now, yes, I agree with you. A sizable number of those people can't work for very legitimate reasons, and I think we all agree we live in a country with a welfare state that should provide support. But I fail to believe that every single one of those people, with support, with help to find a job, with help to sustain a job, with the treatment that they might need on the NHS, which they're not getting. If we do these things, I think a lot of those people could get back into work. And of course, work is important, not just for a government in terms of the tax take we get. We know work is important for people's sense of self-worth, of contributing to society, of feeling fulfilled in life. Yeah. Work is important.
Yeah, and I'd love to, if you're in the audience and you are unable to work for reasons, health reasons, caring reasons, I'd love to hear from you on that. Gentleman there. Yes, on you go.
I personally think that, by observation, the policies are stifling job creation. Now, we look at jobs from skilled level jobs here, but there are a lot of blue-collar jobs as well that are low-skilled, semi-skilled. But I'll give an example here in Aberdeen. We look at the high streets in Aberdeen. Things are technically fizzling out. Businesses are closing down on a daily basis. A lot of people there work blue-collar jobs there. Now, there's an increasing number of people who are moving into the benefit scheme because they cannot get functional jobs. I see businesses also, council giving them some form of subvention. Why are your policies killing this business and then you are handing out to organizations? I think policies are part of the reasons why more people are going into the benefit scheme.
Thank you. Lady in the middle here. Yeah.
I think there's a problem that's been with us for decades now, and that's the erosion of self-worth for people in this country. And I think that that's come about from fear of losing your job, low-paid, unskilled work, that's the only thing that's available, poorer education outcomes for many people, fear of losing your home. And I think until we address those, we're never, ever going to be able to sort this out.
Edward Mountain?
Really good point. I'm going to show my age here. I first got involved in politics 45 years ago. So I've seen various governments try and tackle this problem, and it is a problem. And it's getting the balance right between making sure those people who need help are given the help they need and are not left behind, and those people who need less help aren't taking the resources away from the people that need the help. And I think there's a lot of truth in what Michael says about getting the balance right and how to address that. I don't think any government's done it properly in my entire time of being involved in politics. But I think it's a conversation we've got to have, and we've got to open it up because, you know, money is tight now. There's no doubt about it. There are short resources, and we're going to have to work out how to make those resources go further than they are at the moment. And everything should be on the table in my mind because, you know, I remember If I'm really honest, when we used to get, you know, child benefit, did I need child benefit when my children were born? No, probably not. Would it have been better to go to somebody else? Yes, it absolutely would have done. So I think we should have these conversations, and the question of the universality of benefits and maybe even further than just benefits needs to be discussed. But we need to do it without bringing politics into it. We need to do it to make sure that we take society and communities with us and no one's left behind.
Okay, well, we're having the conversation here tonight. Hussein, on the front row here. Yeah, on you go.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having us. And I'm a disabled person myself. I'm registered blind. I also have a long-term chronic health condition, and I've been on both sides of the fence, and I'm very fortunate at the moment to have multiple jobs. I'm employed and self-employed. But I find myself having sympathy for both Mr. Mountain and Kirsty as well. You know, there's no doubt that we have a very punitive system, but something that nobody here has mentioned is the massive volunteer workforce that we have, who provide a really valuable service, particularly when it comes to public engagement and participation roles, especially in the third sector, a lot of whom would fit into the categories that we're talking about. But nobody has talked about that section of society who arguably are already providing a vital public function, but would be classed as economically inactive. So, you know, what happens to that group of people? Because, you know, ideally they have skills, otherwise they wouldn't be volunteering. And they often do very highly technical skills, you know, strategic roles, requiring a lot of lived experience and personal knowledge, which arguably could be put to really good use. So I'd like to hear, you know, what we do with that area, because we are demonizing people, as Kirsty said, but I think we're demonizing, you know, everybody with the same brush.
Okay, Geoff Aberdein.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I work with, I'm a board member of Aberdeen Football Club Community Trust, and one of the programmes...
Commiserations.
Well, it's the Community Trust, it's a charitable wing, our formal term, I promise. But they have a mental health programme, and my eyes were really opened, and I don't think I'd answered the question the way I'm about to now, before my experience working with the Trust. And I'm very familiar with these figures. Underpinning them, actually, if you look in the data, is a lot of mental health issues that people are now subscribing to disability payments. If we can focus on proper measures and programmes for those people, they will become economically active again very soon. The second point I wanted to make is, think about Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire. We have traditionally had one of the lowest economic inactivity rates because there was high-value jobs on our doorstep. There was innovation on our doorstep. Going back to the conversation that we had earlier about energy, that is the way you engender economic growth and greater economic activity. That has to be the focus of our politicians.
Okay. Lorna, Slater, we've got a problem. We've had a historic problem with productivity in this country. What's the solution to it when we look at the economically inactive in society? Is benefits the answer?
Well, I think a secure social safety net is really important, and I would challenge Edward Mountain's assertion that money is tight. We have more billionaires in the UK than ever before. The wealthy, the 1%, have gotten staggeringly wealthy, while everyone else's wages have declined, and your pound does not go as far as it used to. Their money just goes up and up and up. So what we're not doing is talking about redistribution of wealth. All the other political parties talk about growth as if it's the sort of magic fairy that's going to sprinkle the dust on everyone. Actually, we have plenty of wealth in our society, but it's being hoarded by a very few. We need to tax that wealthy to make sure that that money can be reinvested.
Should we be trying to reduce, though, Lorna, the number of people who are economically inactive? That's what Labour are trying to do.
We need to open up that number and see who the actual people are that are in there and treat them as human beings, because I don't believe in this talking about people shirking. We know people want to work. Within that are people who have disabilities and health needs, people who are studying. There is a good question as to whether people with small children should be working. Shouldn't they be looking after their children? Shouldn't we have a society that supports them to do that? And the Scottish Greens absolutely support universal benefits, because when everybody gets a benefit, it benefits the whole of society. It means there's no stigma attached, and it means that those are good quality benefits. What we need to do is make sure that we're taxing the super wealthy to pay for that. And in Scotland, we're doing good things with the Scottish Child Payment. Scotland is the only part of the UK that's going to be lifting children out of poverty, and poverty is very expensive to society. Poor people have poor health outcomes, poor educational outcomes, and poorer long-term prospects.
We hear you. Michael, I will come back to you. Lady with her hand up here. Yes.
Hi.
So I work in education and I'm currently teaching pupils about how you break the poverty cycle. I recognise that some people are legitimately not able to work, but those adults who are able to work, there might be a stigma about education and breaking that barrier. And so we need to get them, we've got a fantastic college here, and so we can support adults through that way. And then that will help break the cycle in the future and will help encourage children today.
And how would you suggest we do that? How do we do that?
Well, we get the college involved, and we have like courses that are aimed at adults who are wanting to get into work. Yes, support them that way.
Okay, thank you. Man with the glasses in the end. Yes.
As Labour have found out with their non-dom policy, the super wealthy are highly mobile, and if you go after them, they'll just leave the country and take their wealth with them.
The European Union was developing policies on that before Brexit. So the way you combat that is by working with other countries around the world so that people will be taxed equally and fairly around the world. That is one of the reasons why so many billionaires and multimillionaires were campaigning for Brexit, so that they could avoid exactly that kind of
Michael Shanks, we've heard today that growth forecasts have again been downgraded. There's going to be cuts coming, isn't there? Is this one of the reasons you're looking at welfare right now?
Well, there's no doubt we've got a really difficult spending review coming up. We want that to be a multi-year spending review so that departments can invest in policies. But the key thing was in October, we made the decision to end austerity and to invest in public services. That meant more than £5 billion coming to Scotland, the biggest budget the Scottish Government's had since devolution. So we do see investing in public services as important, but I think we all would, as taxpayers, see the job of government as being around making sure we're prioritising spending on the people who need it most. And if I can, the women in the centre that I just wanted to come back to, because alongside how we encourage more people into work, we do need to give people a better deal in work. And that's partly why the government has driven forward on raising the living wage for more than 100,000 Scots, and ending fire and rehire and ending 0 hours contracts, because for too many people, they're in precarious jobs that aren't making ends meet. And so we need to get more people into work, but those jobs have to be good jobs and jobs that are sustainable for people.
We could have put that fair work policy in sooner if it was devolved to Scotland.
Gentleman in the front row in the white shirt.
I'm a retired psychiatric nurse. I'm economically inactive at the moment. You're going on about mental health and the need for mental health to be addressed and physical health problems. How are you going to attract the likes of myself back into mental health nursing?
Kirsty Blackman, just briefly.
I mean, it's an incredibly difficult job. My parents were both nurses and worked as mental health nurses in various places. But I agree there's an issue with this. There's an issue with it because nurses are not given the kind of level of recognition that they need and deserve. We don't pay carers, for example, enough. And I don't think societally we've got that right, actually. But in Scotland, nurses are paid better than their counterparts in England. We're doing our bit, but we're not there yet.
All right,
we need to do more.
we're out of time, I'm afraid. Thank you very much indeed for that and for all your questions this evening. That's it for tonight in Aberdeen. Back with you next week in Edinburgh for our special 150th show. Have a look at the website if you want to come along and join us there, or in Greenock the following week. If you missed any of tonight's show, it's repeated a bit later on BBC One Scotland or any time on the iPlayer. Thank you very much indeed to my panel here tonight and to our audience here in Aberdeen, and to you at home for watching wherever you are in Scotland. We'll see you next week in Edinburgh. In the meantime, stay safe, stay well from all of us in Debate Night. Good night.